Hi, I'm George the Antique Nomad. Come with me as I wander the country in search of valuable vintage, amazing antiques, and cool collectibles. We'll buy, sell, and trade at antique malls, shops, and shows, estate sales, flea markets, thrift stores, anywhere people go to find really interesting things that just aren't made anymore. So come on, let's go! This is George the Antique Nomad. I'm glad to be with you again. I've been shopping and picking up consignments and merchandise all over Seattle, and I have a couple dozen things to show and tell about, so let's get started. I am doing this thanks to the Level 2 members, and I want to thank them very much for their support and participation. And if you're interested in memberships, you can go to my page and look at the join, hit the join button, or look at a video about that and know more about what that is. But part of the idea is to create more content. So thank you very much to all those folks who've helped. The first item tonight is this. And this is interesting to me because of where I am right now. Let's see if we can get it to where it doesn't glare too much. There we go. This is a map of the United States, and this is from 1830. And it's actually a map of North America officially. It's by the Huntington Company in Connecticut, and it is an engraving. Now, maps were really a political statement in some ways back then, and this one really shows that, because if you notice, first of all, we have Mexico. Mexico still has Texas, California, New Mexico, Arizona, all of the southwestern states. And yes, this is quite old, 1830. It was framed in the 1950s or 60s, but this is an 1830s map. And it is a color-tinted map, as you can see. And what's interesting about it is, look at the United States in pink. The United States includes all of this area here, which is Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia. In the 1830s, it started to become a question of whether the English or the United States were going to have possession of this area, and it started to become a big controversy. And by the 1840s, there was the threat of war between the U.S. and England, and President Polk was elected to deal with that, and he dealt with it by bluffing England, who could have easily beaten us in a war. But he figured that they wouldn't bother, and he was right, because there were 6 times as many Americans as there were English in this area, and so that was the origin of the term 54-40, or fight, meaning we were going to fight to keep all of the land up to the 54th parallel, which butted up against Alaska, which was Russian then. Well, we compromised and drew a straight line, so there's a border between Washington and British Columbia now, and so that is the reason that British Columbia is in Canada, which really ended up helping Canada because they needed a western port. So this is a neat piece, and I am excited to have found that. It came out of a house in Mercer Island, which is a wealthy enclave outside of Seattle. The second piece that I want to show is right here. Now, I was in Sparks, Kansas, and I bought and sold, you might have seen in my video, a red one of these, but this one is black. The red is what we see all the time, and the black is any color other than red is unusual. This is a promotional car. This is a 1957 TBird. You can see 1957 on the back. What's really neat about this one, besides the fact that it's an unusual color, because the red ones usually sell for about $30 to $50, depending on condition, but this one has its convertible top. I have never seen one with a convertible top in all the years I've been doing this, and I've seen a lot of promotional cars because I really like them. And so I think this thing's really cool, and I think it actually might be rather valuable because of the top that is here. Recently, one of these in blue, which is another unusual color without a convertible top, sold for $165 on eBay. So it was really fun for me to find one that was a little different than the usual thing that we see. And so that was exciting to me as well. And the other thing that's nice and very important with these, it's got all its mirrors, it's got its little antenna. They would have kept the antenna down, that's why it's in there. The steering wheel is in it. There's nothing broken. There's no chrome missing. It's very important that these be in good condition because otherwise it's a rat rod. And, well, you know, those are fun to drive, but not so much fun to have as toys. People like things to be in better shape than that. Let's see. Next, I've got a few notes here so that I keep track of what I'm doing. The next thing I wanted to show is this. Now, the flap is off the box, but the fact that any of the box is intact at all is pretty amazing considering that this camera, which as it says is a Brownie Junior, was done by Kodak. And here's the camera, the original camera in the original box, and we're going to take it out. This was a very simple box camera. When Kodak first came out with these in the 1890s, you had to send the whole thing in and they took the film out and developed it, and then you had to go buy another camera. Well, they finally decided that wasn't really efficient. So they decided that they were going to make something where you could put the film in, shoot it yourself, send them the film, and they would develop that, and you got to keep the camera. And that's when the box cameras started. They were very simple. I have this one upside down, so let's put it right side up. There we go. And they were very simple. You looked through this lens. You couldn't really focus very well, much like me on some of these videos that I do, but I'm getting better. And you would look through, and then you were able to actually get some sort of focus. It's nice because it's been in the box, so it's in really great shape. It's got its handle, and the handle actually says 620 Brownie Junior. That was the official name of these. And the front on this is Art Deco, as is the box. There was a fellow named Walter Dorwin Teague. He was one of the big industrial designers of the 1920s and 30s who went to the Art Deco exposition in Paris and came back and said, boy, we've got to develop our own type of American design because everything we're doing is just stealing from the Europeans. And they came up with streamline modern, and this is very much streamline modern. Kodak, like everyone else, was suffering in the Depression, and they thought we need to jazz up the simple plain box camera in some way to get people to buy them again, and this worked. They sold a bunch of these, but you don't see them this clean with the boxes anymore, so I was excited to see that come along. And I'm going to just put that flat back on. So it's nice because it's about as complete as can be, and it's got everything and has scarcely, if ever, been used. So I always like things that are in really tip-top shape if possible. Collectors always, I was told by a collector of tins, always buy the best, always buy the things in the best condition. And boy, he has done very well over the years because of that. Speaking of Art Deco, here is a really pretty piece. This is a company that we may be familiar with in modern times because they are still around, one of the few. This is Villarbach. And Bach was Bach Frere, and they were based in Belgium. And you have a nice, well, this one's kind of a blurry mark, but you can see the mark on there. So that's the Bach of Villarbach. Ooh, you could see the mark. It seems like my light's playing tricks with me. But the good thing is that with the bright light, you're getting the true color of this, which is very hard to photograph. I've had a hard time trying to get this to really show. And I love this thing too. I think it's just amazing. The color is just fantastic. I love the bulbous shape. It's very Art Deco. They had a designer by the name of Charles Cateau who came to them. He'd been trained at Sèvres, which is the national French porcelain factory. And that's saying a lot because, of course, the French have Limoges and they're really good at what they do. And he came from that background to the Bach company in 1906 in Belgium, in a town, it's a little hard to read on here, but La Louvière. And the mark actually does say La Louvière. And he came up with this celadon. Now, celadon with this crackling, this is intentional crackling. It's done in the glaze. It's an ancient Chinese technique that the Europeans finally figured out. And it's such an amazing color of blue. And the blue is a lot less common than the green in celadon. So this is a pretty fantastic piece. It came from a friend of mine. He's been a collector of Art Deco for many, many years, and he's downsizing and asked me to take this and see if I can find a home for it. And I bet I can, because it is just gorgeous, I thought. Just love that shade of blue. I have to admit that a little piece of me is tempted to keep it, but you know, I'm tempted to keep lots of things. One nice thing about being a reseller is you get to be a custodian of things, enjoy them a lot, and then send them on to their ultimate buyer and the person who really loves them the most. So now the next piece here, this one's a little heavy, so let me pick it up and get it out here for you to see. These are something that we see in Washington State more than I see in other parts of the country that I go, and that is because it is a camphor chest. And camphor is a type of wood that is found in China and in Asia, and this one is Chinese. You can see all the carving on it. The reason people love camphor there, and the reason a lot of people liked buying these and sending them as gifts from the era of the Second World War, the occupation of Japan, GIs who were stationed in Vietnam even bought these. The reason that they like them is because, like a cedar chest, camphor is very good at keeping out the bugs. And the other thing that's nice about this one, I'm going to set it down for a minute because it is heavy and a little awkward. But the nice thing about this one, besides the smell, which I'm afraid I can't share with you, is it has its original lock. And the way these locks that were made for this work, they go through that little handle on the front there, and you push them in and they actually close, and then you use this little tool, this is the key, and you have to put it in the right way, and when you push it, and I may have it in the wrong way, because it looks the same both ways, which is part of the trick. When you push it, it comes open, except for the moment of truth when I want to do this to show all of you, after it's worked perfectly every single time. So there's a nice thing. Anyhow, here we go. There, we got it. So that's the way that these lock, and the locks are usually missing or broken on these. So it was nice that it had the whole thing. And it's got a great smell. It was a piece that was used again in another well-to-do enclave of Seattle. I think the guy brought it back when he was stationed in the Korean War. And so it is a neat piece, and it will find a new home. We find that they're considered very uncommon on the East Coast, but we see a lot of them on the West Coast because a lot of our military people here brought them back. And let's see, oh, linens. Okay, now these I have to see are pretty cute. I don't usually deal a lot in linens. I know I was talking with Fatbird Finds, and they were talking about how they were starting to love linens because they're easy to ship. I thought these were just really neat. I got these in Colorado on the way out west. And they are a sugar and creamer. You have he, you have she, and then they meet. Now this is part of a set of 7, and the reason for 7 is because 7 days of the week, and these are technically dish linens. They open up quite large, larger than I can really show you here, and that's why you'd have one for each day of the week, and then at the end of the week you wash the whole thing and start over. But these, I think, were very seldom used. So here's day 4. They have gotten together, and now they have hearts. Oh, Gritty Gret is here. And then we have flowers, because they get married. And we have duet. And after duet, of course, comes quartet, and now there is a little creamer and sugar in the family. I just thought that these were really sweet. They are from the 1940s. It was common for women to embroider in this manner at the time, and these seem to have been done freehand. A lot of times they were actually done on a pattern. But these were done freehand, and I think that they are just really darling. And I believe someone will really enjoy them. And it was nice. They're very clean. I didn't see any big stains or holes or tears on any of them. And so I just thought they were a really fun set. So while I don't buy a lot of linens, I buy them if I think they're cute, and I thought those qualified. Embroidery is really kind of a lost art. We see a lot of it these days, but it's all done by machines. Very few people do it by hand anymore. So I think a lot of that stuff's kind of underrated, and at some point people will realize that. And so we have, this is something I wanted to show because this particular one, it has its original label, Bessigen, and this is a company called, we say Dale of Norway, but it's actually Dola, and Dola is a little town in Norway on the west coast. And since 1879, they have been using locally produced wool to make sweaters like this one, as well as cardigans. They also produce for the World Cup ski team in Norway. And this is the sort of thing that just about everybody who goes to Norway buys as a souvenir. And we see them in Seattle because there is a large Scandinavian population here. There's shops that are Scandinavian import shops still. You can see the tag here. This one is probably about 30 years old. It has never actually been worn. Those are the original tags. In Norway, you'll see the price. This is in, I believe they use krone there. The price was 1,060. That is not dollars, however. But in reality, they sell new for about $150 a piece. I grew up near Paulsbo across the water from Seattle, and Paulsbo is 20% of the people to this day claim Norwegian heritage. It is our little Norway, and the town is really cute. It's full of Norwegian specialty shops. You see this sort of thing here. So it's very popular here and anywhere that has skiing. So I thought it was very pretty, and the colors are strong, and the fact that it had never been worn. That one's a lady small, which, you know, it'll fit someone and not everyone, I'm afraid. But I thought it was a really beautiful piece, and I thought it would be fun to show because vintage textiles are definitely an area of collecting, and I don't touch on them a lot because sizing can be difficult, but sweaters and things that are a little more universal or something I definitely look for, and if you're out there as a reseller, that's definitely something for you to look for because you will sometimes find those things very inexpensively at estate sales or in thrift stores and that sort of thing. Since we're on a round the world tour, I thought I would show something from a round the world tour. And this is a Boomerang, and I just love this thing. I had to show this because I know that we have some folks who are in Australia and New Zealand who watch. Some of our level 2 members, I believe, are also from that part of the world. This is a souvenir boomerang given out on the P&O Oronce, which was a ship that sailed in Australia and went around Australia. You see Pioneer Australia Tours greet you. And if you're really good, you can throw this thing and it'll come back to you. It is actually made correctly as a boomerang. I have never mastered that. So I will not throw this one because it will go through the plate glass window. However, this is really a neat piece. P&O stands for Peninsular and Oriental, which was a big steamship line that existed until from the, I believe, the 1790s until very recently. And it was recently acquired by Carnival Cruises, of all things. But this is the Waltzing Matilda Round the World Holiday. They started doing these tours in 1932 in the depth of the Depression. And then during the Second World War, all of their ships were commandeered for war purposes. So this could only have been made in about a 7-year period with this type of graphic. So I have to believe that you had to be pretty wealthy to go on this, and not many of these could exist. I've never seen one before. I've never seen one come up online. So I will be curious to see what the value of that piece is. That's not something I've been able to find any comparables for. The next piece that I want to show you is something that I don't usually acquire or deal with because I'm not too big. I know a lot of resellers do very well with more recent things and limited editions, but this one I picked up for a particular reason. It is the Bright Lights Bulb Factory, and this is part of the Department 56 North Pole series. Well, I found out a few things about Department 56 that I didn't know. First of all, they have been producing since 1976, and when I mentioned to someone, oh, that's not really that old, they said, that's the year I was born, and I realized, oh, yes, 1976 has been a while. This particular one is more recent than that. This one came out in 2008, but what's special about it is it was a thing just done as a set for that year. Well, if you remember 2008, that was the last time we had big economic upheaval and an election, and that was a time when a lot of people were a little tight on money, so they suddenly realized they had to lower the price on these, and they did it as a special box set for that season only, priced at $79. They actually sell for more than that online now, and it does have all the pieces in it. And for that reason, I realized that somebody who was not able to afford this then might be in a position to get it now for their collection. And these actually don't come up that often. And so that's the reason I went ahead and picked that up. The sirens out the window are, I just want to let you know, because I've had people rather concerned that I came to Seattle. That was a fire station. It has been very, very peaceful here, and really quite lovely and very calm. And all of that trouble seems to be far, far behind. Oh, yes, this is another thing that's very pretty. So we're going to go back from that last piece about 100 years in time and show you this, because these come up so seldomly, especially in this condition, and especially with any detail on them. This is a Mica Shade from the arts and crafts period. And this one's especially interesting because it's got this floral design with the tracery that gives it a three-dimensional effect. Now, I'm usually a big stickler for condition. This one is in perfect shape as far as there is no damage to any of the mica and any of the panels, which to me is absolutely critical. There is a little bit of loss in the tracery on some of these sides. And you'll see this one particularly has lost a little bit. I wish I could show you here how beautiful the color is. It's a very pretty amber and ochre combination with the light coming through it. They are just gorgeous. I will tip it up underneath so you can see the mica. Mica was used in shades in the arts and crafts era because it was a natural material. The arts and crafts studios and designers were really big on preserving the idea of natural materials, natural motifs, which were also popular in the concurrent Art Nouveau period. And they really wanted things that felt like they were real. It was a reaction against industrialization and against the mass production of the Victorian era. We see Victorian and we see lots of beautiful things, but there were also a lot of really cheap, shoddily made things that did not last that we don't see from the Victorian era, and arts and crafts was the reaction to that. And this is just a really special and unusual piece. There's a lot of people in Washington State who have craftsman homes, and that's where this one came from. And we see a lot of people interested in restoring craftsman homes in places all throughout the United States and Canada now. So I have a feeling that somebody will be very happy to get that. The next piece I wanted to show all of you folks is something that I showed in a video when I got it. And this is a Faberge Egg. Now this is not the original Faberge Egg made for the Czars. Those sell for somewhere in the $7,000 to $75,000 range. This one will be available for less. You may or may not recognize that tune, but that is on Moonlight Bay from the movie of the same name with Doris Day and Gordon MacRae from 1951. And this is the Moonlight Egg. These were done by the Franklin Mint about 30 years ago. And you will see the House of Faberge licensed them the rights to do it, and you'll see the Faberge mark right there. And there is a big collector market for these. These actually are popular and typically sell between $75 and $125 depending on the time of the year. A lot of them are given as Christmas presents. And so I was happy to get this because it is in good working order. We're going to go from the Moonlight Bay to Italy now. This, I believe, is, to my eye, just a gorgeous piece. This is Murano Glass, and it is specifically by the Salviati studio. This is a completely hand-blown, hand-worked piece, and with this plain bottom and the gold, these are usually from the 1950s. They made variations on this theme from then until about the late 1980s. They are not cheap, they were not inexpensive new, and they're not inexpensive now. I actually bought a large set of this, various stemware and serving pieces at an estate in Colorado on my way here. I paid $1,000 for the set. This happens to be a single that was part of the set, but they didn't buy any of the other champagne sherbets. Now, when I say champagne sherbet, that's because up until the 1970s, champagne was served in open stems like this, as opposed to tall, narrow stems. And the reason was that you wanted to get all the bubbles in your face. And the other reason was because you were probably going to drink that champagne fairly fast. Well, now people are a little more demure about their drinking. They want the bubbles to last longer. That's why we switched over to flutes. And so this is done using a fused glass method. And the fused glass fuses actual gold leaf into the glass while they're making it, and that's where this gold comes from. So they are not inexpensive to do. They have to do what they call lamp work or flame work, where they pull all of these by hand, and then they have to attach all of them together, much like glass was done 200 years ago, where this is attached to the bottom and this is attached to the top. So it's really quite difficult to make. Salviati is one of the big names in Murano studio glass, and this particular piece is likely to sell in the $95 to $110 range. The compotes and candlesticks can go for considerably more than that. So I was really excited to get it. I had a friend who got a set of this 20 years ago and sold it right away. And this is the first time I've ever owned any. It's that hard to find. So that was a pretty exciting thing. And you never know, you might just happen across some somewhere. It does happen sometimes that people don't understand what they have. So it's a nice thing for all of you to know that it's out there, and maybe you'll have some luck and come into one. The next thing I wanted to show, I just think these are so cute, and they're also very heavy, which is nice. This is a Scotty Doorstop, obviously, two Scotties, really. But these are Texaco's waiting or listening Scotties. They were called both of those things. And if you look on the back, it's hard to see, but this says a mold number and Texaco here. And it also says Belvedere Incorporated on the bottom here. And that's really important because those are the clues that this is not a reproduction. Another clue is, it's funny how oftentimes looking at the back of things is more important than the front when you're trying to figure out what things are. Look at the paint here, this strange way that it all sort of is modeled together on the back. That actually is a hallmark of an old piece too, because the new pieces tend to be just sort of, first of all, the new pieces are made in black. They don't usually have the paint on them, and when they do, it's just sort of sprayed on there, and it just doesn't look right. These were used in a gas station somewhere. You can see a little bit of wear on their noses here, because that's where the door would have bumped, and a little bit of wear on the edge here, which is where the thing should be worn. Again, if you're looking at cast iron, there's a lot of reproductions. They're usually pretty easy to spot if you look for how things are worn. Fake wear, they tend to do it in random places. They do it all over. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. So when you see something like this, you want to take a look and make sure that what you're seeing is really what you're getting. They're nice and heavy. The other thing is that if you look at the surface paint, it's a little bit crackled from age, which again makes sense. That would be the part that got the sun, got the dirt, and so that would be correct. This was a very popular logo. Scotties were so popular in the 1930s, and the Texaco logo with the waiting Scotties, the idea was that because you used Texaco gas and oil, that your car ran so smoothly that the Scotties couldn't hear you when you were driving up the driveway. That was the marketing campaign that kicked these off. And this doorstop should be worth somewhere in the $95 range. Now I got this because I wanted to have some things that sort of ranged from inexpensive to more expensive. This is not an expensive piece, but it's a cute piece, and I have a hunch that these are going to become more expensive, and that's why I bought a whole collection. I've never really paid a lot of attention to talc tins before. Let me see if I can somehow get this. There we go. I think you can see it a little better. I hadn't really made a big effort to buy talcum powder tins in the past because I thought they were cute, but they were just sort of bathroom accessories, and I didn't really pay them much heed. And then recently, talcum powder has become very controversial. It's largely been withdrawn from the market. Unfortunately, it appears that it is not good for people to use, even though it was a mainstay in American and North American bathroom and boudoir places and probably elsewhere in the world for many years. Because of that, there's suddenly interest in the tins on a level that there hasn't been before, and I've noticed the prices have been rising rather quickly. This one is from about 1940. You see the antebellum dressed woman in the big hoop skirt. This is of course, the woman is dressed like someone from Gone with the Wind, which came out in 1939, and so you have that influence. The colors are really pretty, and it's not expensive today, but I think that might be a future collectible to look for. And I bet they do become collectible, absolutely. So while I'm thinking of it, please comment in the space below here, and also hit the thumbs up button to like this video. If you haven't subscribed, click the subscribe button below. Also, hit the bell below to be notified of new videos coming every Monday and Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern. And thank you so much for following along. Let's go back to this video. Onward and upward. Let's show you something else. I thought this was fun because this is a custard glass vase, and it glows under a black light. Now, lots of custard glass glows under a black light, but it all depends on how much uranium salt is in it. They actually used uranium salt rather than uranium oxide. It's a little different chemical. It was so that they could get a yellowish tinge to this. And my light is so strong that you're not truly getting all of the yellow shades that you really should be getting, but it is actually more of a custard. This particular one also has a nice opalescent fire, and that tells us that it was made about 1910. And it was made by the Jefferson Company originally, and then they sold out to Northwood, and Northwood is the one that made it as custard glass. Now, Heisey Glass did really heavy uranium in there so that it had a very bright glowing green quality to it. But this particular one is actually by Northwood after they bought the Jefferson Company. And Northwood was an interesting fellow. He came over from England. He'd been an employee in the English factories, I believe in Bristol, England. And he'd worked his way up to some sort of a line manager and wasn't really, I think, considered much of anybody there. But when he emigrated to this country, it turned out he was quite brilliant. He understood all of the aspects of factory production and had a real eye for beauty and also knew how to get some really good designers. And so Northwood ended up being a major American glass company for a long period of time. They bought out Jefferson in 1910 and they kept operating, I believe, until the 1930s. This piece, because it has uranium in it, will glow under a black light, and it doesn't glow as much as the Heisey piece because they didn't put as much uranium salt in, but it does actually glow very nicely. I really wish I could get it to where it would not white out so much. Let me see if I turn down the light just a little, if you can see it a little bit better. There we go. We can turn the light back up later. That's a little more true to the color. All of the florals on it are hand painted, and this is a beaded pattern. And the hand painted florals are kind of unusual. It's a nice piece. They're not terribly expensive, like a lot of earlier pieces of custard glass. They'd kind of gone out of fashion, and now that people are discovering uranium glass, they are coming back into fashion again. So as a result, we are starting to see interest in these again. And I think that the value of this piece is probably somewhere in the $25 to $35 range these days. The next piece I wanted to show from this haul is the Francoma. He's an Indian, but if you list him on eBay, you cannot put Native American down because Native American has to be specifically something cultural. And Francoma, back in the old days before we became more politically correct, referred to them as the Indian, and so I will do the same for that reason. Francoma pottery is from Oklahoma. I had the pleasure of seeing the factory before they closed. They are out of business now, and when I went into the factory outlet, they had a bunch of these for sale that were factory seconds, and looking back on it, I wish I'd bought them all because it's a great design. Factory second could be something as little as there was a tiny bubble in the glaze or something very, very minor. And if you ever do get to tour any of our few factories that are left over and get to go into their factory stores, definitely look at the second shelves because sometimes you can find really good deals on things, and what makes them a second or an overrun may have nothing to do with the quality being bad, and they may be just as saleable. So this fellow is in bone white. That was one of Francoma's glazes that came out in the 1980s and 90s. You can also tell this is a later piece because the color of the clay on the bottom is more of a pinkish color as opposed to a brick red, which was the Sapulpa clay, or the really tan beige color, which was Ada clay. So this was the second Sapulpa clay. They added another chemical to it because they thought that the brick red was showing through some of these white glazes too much, and they didn't like the effect. So this is really the last phase of their production. You'll notice it's not marked, but it's absolutely there where John Frank was the owner. That's the reason for the name Francoma. And he and his wife and daughter ran the pottery firm for a period of about 70 years. And this was, he started in the 1930s, actually in the worst year of the Depression, 1933. So for those of you who might be thinking, boy, times are hard right now, hard times are actually a great time to start a business, it turns out, because you have nowhere to go but up. And so he started his business and he did a lot of Art Deco designs, and being at the beginning of Route 66 and the Route West, he did a lot of Western designs, and this is one of their better ones. In this shade, it goes for somewhere around $35. If you have the other colors, some of the early scarce colors, they can be as much as 100 plus. Francoma is really neat stuff. It was very good quality, and it really kind of peaked in the 1970s. So if you like mid-century colors like oranges and really deep mossy greens and things like that, you will find neat pieces in Francoma that actually have a mid-century feel as well. Now, the next thing I wanted to show is this purse. This is what we call a reticule. It's Victorian, and it actually, with the fringe, is rather long. And when I say Victorian, this is late Victorian. This is going to be right around 1900, just before Victoria died. And they would have even continued to make this style probably till about 1910 or 15. And it's essentially just an open bag if we pull open the drawstrings a little bit, which is okay to do because this one is in really good shape. And this one, the beading was done on the outside of a fabric pouch. And that's the reason that you have these nice lines, and then you see the fabric in between. So it gives it a little bit of a two-toning effect. You'll see elaborate floral designs on these. This one is rather basic in terms of not having that design, but it's got the nice stripes, and it's a really pretty honey-colored amber. There are certain things that are very important to look for if you're buying these. The first thing is be gentle, but tug gently on the fringe. And the reason you do that is because that is where, if they're not well stored, they can start to rot and they will separate and the beads start to fall all over the place. And that really, really reduces the value if the fringe is missing. You also want to look at the closure and make sure that there's no loops that are broken. You want to make sure that the drawstrings themselves work. This one is in really good shape. It was actually well preserved. It was with a bunch of Native American artifacts in a house out on the Washington coast. And I think they just bought it because they liked it with their Native American bags, but it really is not that at all. It was something that a woman would have carried around during the Gibson Girl era. Gibson Girl being about 1910 and prior. Gibson and Harrison Fisher were illustrators who drew lovely women of that time, and you'll often see them depicted carrying these kind of bags. This particular one, because it is a relatively plain one, is probably worth in the $65 range. When you get into some of the elaborate floral ones, they can easily be well over $100. And you will see some that go way back in time to the mid to late Victorian period as well. And so there's definitely a lot of interest in those. A lot of women like to hang them on their wall, and then they'll take them off and use them if they feel like having something fun to carry with them, or they're dressing up for show, or if they're vintage fashion kind of styled people. Now, when I had the pleasure of meeting Misty and Jocelyn and Jeffrey and Barb and Misty's husband in Ohio when they came to see me at the Springfield Antique Show, Misty and they went to a thrift store while I was selling at the show, and she came up with one of these and was very excited, and I was too. And I said, gosh, I'm secretly a little jealous. I love World's Fair stuff, and I've never had one of these before. And lo and behold, I get to Seattle, and what do I find? I find one of these. This is from the 1939 New York World's Fair, which I guess is pretty obvious. And it's a great Art Deco design. It really emphasizes the trilon and perisphere, which are those objects in the middle, which were the main attraction as far as sort of like the Space Needle was the big icon of the Seattle World's Fair, or the Eiffel Tower was the big icon of the Paris Exposition in the 1880s. Well, that was the big deal at the New York World's Fair, was the trilon and perisphere. And this one was done by Homer Laughlin. And there's the Homer Laughlin mark. And you see this very shiny gold. Anytime you see a gold back stamp, it means that the company thought very highly of what they were doing. And it says, designed by Charles Murphy for the 150th anniversary of the inauguration of George Washington as the first president. Well, that was ostensibly part of the reason they wanted to have the fair in New York, because New York was the first capital when they were at one point while they were building in Washington, D.C. But the real reason that it's significant to collectors is because Charles Murphy was hired after this to go work for the Red Wing Company, and he did a lot of their modernist designs. A lot of their painted dinnerware was his idea, and he also did a lot of their Art Deco designs. So he turned out to be a very important designer, and he mainly designed dinnerware all his life. In the 1940s, for all of the work he did that made Red Wing millions of dollars. I believe he was paid $4,000 a year, which was decent money for that time. But when you think of everything he was doing, it seems like, wow. And yes, Charles Murphy of Red Wing. And so I thought that had a great history, and I just love the design. I love anything World's Fairs. They always sell well. It seems that there's always collectors if they are from the city where the fair took place. I've got a gal in Florida. If you saw a video I did early in this year, 2020, about a show in Palm Beach where I showed a gal who had a whole bunch of eyeglasses, and she wears cat's eyeglasses all the time. She's from New York and she loves that stuff. So I think I'm actually, I think I'm not going to tell her I got it because she'll want it, and I'm not sure I'll have it by then. Now, the next thing I want to show is a little different thing. And I wanted to show this partly because if at some point there's interest amongst viewers, I would be happy to do some sort of a show and tell of coins, because I have collected since I was 6 years old. Let's see if we can get that to come in. I hope you're able to see this. I think that's getting somewhere. Let me see if we can bring, there we go. Now we got it in. So this is a Morgan silver dollar. And Morgan was the designer of most of the newly designed coins in the 1870s, 80s, and 90s in the United States, particularly the larger denominations. Morgan designed this dollar in 1878, and depictions of liberty were always the thing. And you'll notice that liberty is a little bit more robust in this particular depiction. It was definitely fashionable for women to be a little bit on the heavy side in the late Victorian period, because that was considered a sign that you were successful in doing well. This particular one is in what they call between fine and very fine condition, meaning you can see all the detail, meaning that you can read the word liberty on her crown. But there are wear points on the high spots. I'm going to turn it over. This one has a nice eagle on the back. That was the rear design. And in the center under here is a little tiny D. And the D stands for Denver. That is important. It's not so important with this one because this was the last year, 1921, that this design was made. They hadn't actually made silver dollars between 1904 and 1921. They didn't make any, and then they decided they needed some, so they suddenly made 130 million in 1 year, which was a lot for that time. So the 1921 is fairly common, but this one's in good condition. But the little mint mark, again, on this dollar, underneath the bottom, and a lot of older coins in America, the mint marks were on the back. And that can be very important because usually, with a few exceptions, the Philadelphia Mint, which did not use a mint mark back then, made a ton of coins. Denver sometimes made a lot, sometimes didn't. San Francisco usually made less. And in this particular series of dollars, the ones that are marked CC for Carson City are usually very scarce. And that's important because the difference between a CC dollar and this dollar, this one's probably worth, it's 80% silver, and silver's $25 an ounce as I'm recording this, so it's probably worth somewhere in the $20 range just for the silver alone, not counting the collector value. But a CC dollar, a rare one in this condition, could be worth $500 to $1,000. There are some of these that are worth $10,000. So if you find an old stash of coins, it is definitely worth looking into or having someone knowledgeable look into it for you. And I think it's just a beautiful design. It's something I'm trying to collect all of them, except probably not the one that cost $10,000. That's a little out of my budget. Let's see here. Oh, I wanted to put this out because this was something that got so much reaction. I had this in a recent video. I found it in Kentucky on one of the highway tours, and it got such a big reaction that I just had to show it. I'm going to show him with the box, and then I'm going to put the box down because the box is pretty fragile. But he is just so much fun to me. I hadn't seen one of these since I was a little kid, and every time I did see them, it was in the back of a car. And all of a sudden, I saw this one sitting on the back of a trailer at the highway show being sold by someone in Kentucky. He is a nodder. His little head hangs on a little hook there, and he bobs up and down. And so, as you were driving down the street, he would bounce around like this in the back window. And of course, being in the back window, they'd get cooked in the sun. The felt would go bad. They'd fade. Kids would bop them on the head until the head broke off. And so they're really hard to find, especially in this kind of condition. It is the ultimate kitsch. This is something that was done as a novelty in Japan in the 1960s. It was not something anybody took seriously, and it certainly wasn't anything that anybody, I think, would have thought, oh, this is going to be really valuable someday and collectible. And so I just thought it was fantastic. And it turns out that they're fairly hard to find. No one has had one with the box recently that I could find. And the ones without the box that I've seen sell, well, there was actually only one, and it went for $50. So I just thought this was the craziest, most fun thing I had seen in a long time. And I have to admit, if I was still driving my old Studebakers, I would probably have to have kept it and put it in the back of it. But it's not meant to be, because now I drive a minivan because I have to have something I can fill full of stuff, and the minivan does not have a back window that I can put a tiger in. So the next thing I want to show is this robe, and this robe I thought was in amazing condition. It was hanging in a closet at an estate sale I went to recently. And it is another Northwest thing that we see. If you think back to the grunge era in the Northwest, everybody wore plaid. Well, a lot of that plaid was from Pendleton, Oregon. Pendleton is the place, yes, Pendleton was the place that had the, and still has, the Pendleton Roundup, which is a huge rodeo, and it is a really big event. But the other big thing that happens there is the Pendleton Woolen Knitting Mills, and their works have been there for, gosh, I think the better part of a century now plus. And this particular one is going to date to about 1970. It's a men's large, and that's actually the small size for the men's robes. It would certainly fit me. It would actually fit a taller woman as well, and they are kind of unisex. But I like the fact that it had the original sash here, and that it had no holes, no stains. To be honest with you, I suspect that somebody got this and maybe the wool was too scratchy for them, although it's really very smooth as wool goes. This one's a lightweight, it's not super heavy. Maybe it was just that it was in the back of the closet and they forgot about it. I don't think it was worn much, if at all. And so the Pendleton robe is something, I always buy Pendleton anytime I see it, and if you're a reseller out there and you find it, you know, check it over for holes, because wool is delicious, unfortunately, for certain critters like moths and things, but Pendleton sells really well. Pendleton blankets are very popular and sell for good money. And when you get back earlier in time, some of that stuff is rather valuable. They have a museum there, and they actually have come to the antique shows in Portland, Oregon that I've been at, looking for old Pendleton to buy to put in the museum. So even Pendleton is collecting Pendleton nowadays. This box purse here I thought was really fun, and I have to say I started picking up these little basket purses about 25 years ago, and I bought them because I noticed that when I was working at the Pike Place Antique Mall in Seattle, that the Japanese women were carrying basket purses and they liked these kinds of graphics. And so I started picking these up. These usually have a little skyline or group of stores painted on them, and then the names of stores from a particular area were written in them. That's how this company got started. And this company is a company named for two women who were partners in it, called Caro Nan. I'm sure it was Carol or Carolyn and Nancy. And this was a company out of Mississippi. Mississippi, of course, is a state that really has very low income, and I think they decided that they wanted to do something that they could do themselves, and they had basket weavers in the area, and I think they probably saw what Enid Collins was doing in Texas and said, hey, we could do that on baskets, and it became rather a phenomenon. They started doing these ones that were thematic a little bit later on, so this is going to be probably mid-70s because they really come out right around 1970 initially. And here we've got the bridge set, and I think this is really fun. You've got the bridge suits there, you've got the deck of cards on the side. What's really important about these is condition. This one, I believe the woman used for bridge parties. It sat in her house, she didn't carry it around. The felt is great. The really important condition parts are on the corners because these would get bumped and broken if they were hit too hard. The handle is intact, and none of the screen paint is scratched or worn off in any way. And because of that, and because this is a special theme as opposed to the ones with the buildings, which you see a little more often, this could be worth as much as $45 to $50 now. It used to be you saw them for $10 and $15, and if you see them that cheaply now, you should buy them because they are really taking off. I think that because of the popularity of Enid Collins and some of those other mid-century fun, funky fashion purses, that people have caught on to Caro Nan now as well. A different take on mid-century here. So many people are really into swung vases, and I just love this. This is actually, should get credit as being the progenitor of that style. It's a little tall, so I hope you'll be able to see it all. I'll pull it back towards me. There we go. This one is Fostoria's heirloom pattern, and it came out in 1955, so they were a little bit ahead of the other companies that were doing the pulls and the swings to make the elongated glass, because most of those came out in the 1960s. Because Fostoria was doing it back in the 50s, they did a lot of them. They did eventually do a bright yellow and a bright orange when the 60s came along, but they did a lot of these in opalescent glass. And this was a big departure for Fostoria. Fostoria was known as an elegant glassware company that made pretty etched tableware that was fussy for women to have on the table for holidays and for these sort of, bridge parties and luncheons and that sort of thing. And all of a sudden they came out with this. And this was so wild and so new that it did really well. And it does really well with collectors today. This particular piece, I would expect would sell for around $45 or $50. You'll see really tall ones very rarely that sell for well over $100. They also did bowls, they did little relish dishes, they were all accessory pieces, and all of this stuff, it sells very well for me here in Seattle, it sells very well in Florida, anywhere where modernism is popular, and it does not have a label. Fostoria really didn't do etch signatures on their glass or impress signatures. They really just used little paper labels and everyone washed them off as soon as they got home. So you just have to know that that's the pattern, but it's a great pattern and one worth looking at if you see it. And to my eye, it's just really, really quite gorgeous. And as much fun as I'm having with this, I am down to the last piece in the haul. And it is also a vase, and also very deco looking. I have hit a good run with deco here in Seattle. I think deco is starting to come out of collections. A lot of Art Deco started to be put aside by collectors in the 1970s, and a lot of those collectors are going on to assisted living and places like that now, or downsizing. And the fellow that I'm helping sell some of these pieces for is downsizing. He moved to a one-bedroom apartment, and he gave me a very nice collection, of which this is part. Believe it or not, this is Weller pottery. We think of Weller as being floral patterns like Roseville, or the old arts and crafts stuff with the brown that's big and bulbous and kind of ponderous. But Weller in the 1930s, like everyone else, was trying to stay in business, and they went modern. They went for streamline design like crazy, and this pattern is called Lorbeek, which is an odd name, Lorbeek. It came in a lavender color, and it came in this pretty soft blue-gray. And this is a triple bud vase, so you see there's 3 portholes. Sometimes when you see these and they're more round and they have multiple holes coming out of the sides, they're actually strawberry vases, but this one was just made to arrange flowers. And if you think about it, with flowers in it, you would get 3 different levels of things fanning out, and it would be a very attractive centerpiece. It has a different Weller pottery mark than we usually see. Usually we see the script in the bottom, or a stamp that looks like an embossed typewriter stamp, but this is the Art Deco line Wellerware mark that you see right about 1930. So this is a little different. And occasionally you'll see these pieces unmarked, so it's good to kind of know that they're out there, because you might find a sleeper once in a while. It's a handsome little piece, and I just love Weller. I think they did such nice soft glazes. The quality was always really good. And here we have it. And so that is what I have found so far in my hauls in my trip to Seattle. And I'm so glad that you were able to see this with me. I'm George the Antique Nomad, and I'm on Periscope, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and I look forward to more adventures with you soon. Thanks for joining me again in the fun and fascinating antique community, here where online meets the real world. Please click the subscribe button below, click the bell to be notified when new videos upload, leave a comment below, and hit thumbs up to like this video. Links to our online social media daily posts and our items for sale are in the description. This is George at the Antique Nomad. Bye for now.